Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the propaganda at the moment, and certainly in Australia, but I've seen it elsewhere in like Canada as well, doing the rounds where the teachers' unions and the woke activists and so on are claiming that the declining educational standards, and no one's really disputing standards are declining. The reasons or the causes are disputed, or hotly disputed even. But the claim is that there's simply not enough money being put into education. The underfunding of the school system, this is like high schools in particular, are just underfunded. Just simply not enough money, and because of that, teachers are leaving in droves, and they're not being replaced, and therefore class sizes are massive. Teachers don't have time. Teachers are overworked. Teachers are getting burned out. And the people who are suffering are the students, particularly the students, the minority students who need help the most. So it's claimed. So really, students are suffering, but particularly the proverbial black lesbian students are suffering more. So this is the propaganda anyway. So is any of it true? Now, I've looked at a number of interviews on the current affairs shows, because it's a bit of a hot topic right now, and no one's addressing the issue. The politicians don't, the teachers' unions people don't, supposed impartial, independent former teachers, they don't. So no one's prepared to talk about the real issues and why the decline, or even if the claims are true. The claims that class sizes have never been bigger and teachers have to cope with more than ever, and this sort of thing. This is put forward as being a fact, but just a very simple, cursory look at the numbers and the money and it's going in, and doing some very simple mathematics tells you that it's all lies. All of it is lies, and yet the interviewers don't push back. Now, some of these cashed up, prominent current affairs shows, they could easily put analysts or investigators or researchers onto it that could in seconds, I can find in less than a minute, that prove that the claims these guests are making are just not only untrue but outrageously untrue, and that they know they're untrue. So we could pick that up pretty quickly. So let's have a look at some of these things then. Now, the claim is that per student, the amount of funding has never been lower, and this is a real problem. And that one of the main reflections of this is class sizes. So let's just have a look at that. Now, let's have a look at, say, an average class size in 1970, for example. The average class, so this is high school, average class size was 32. Now, the average class size has declined substantially there. So say 20 years ago, it was 19 students, or just over 20 years ago, it was 19 students per teacher. And today it's supposedly 13 students per teacher. So it's substantially less than half what it was in 1970. Now, it's a little bit difficult because whenever statistics are used, I find that the people who are putting the statistics together are massaging them and including or not including certain categories of numbers or information in order to skew things in the way they want them presented. So, for example, in just one document I looked at, they're including teachers' aides or teachers' assistants. And they're more prominent, say, in primary school than in high school. But nonetheless, they're not including those. But in other calculations, they do include them. If they want to project, for example, the amount of money per teacher being spent has declined, then they will add in teachers' aides. And if they want to do another pirouette in a different direction, then they will simply remove the teachers' aides and use only absolute, the frontline teachers rather than the background administrative people. So they play around a lot with that. Also, there are vast numbers of facilities in the education department. For example, if there's a massive department in every education department now around Australia where a teacher only has to say they think that Billie Jean is a lesbian, and if she got a bit of encouragement and help, she could come out, or maybe she's trans. And then a whole cabal of assistants descends on the school to help Billie Jean and show her the way, and make sure she gets into the sports that are hockey that are 100% lesbian or nearly, and they do all sorts of things there. We don't have to tell your parents. So this whole protection group arrives of lesbian activists, by the way, being paid by the Department of Education. So there's all these sort of people in background now being paid, which have drastically altered the economics of the education department. Similarly, teachers are now very activist in saying to their students, well, you're going to have a day off from school if you go to the march, the climate change march or the Black Lesbian March. So students are being given quite a lot of time off to attend these activists and very much encouraged to be activists. We're surrounded by Nazis. Nazis are Hitler is in every corner. We have to fight back. You have to fight back. Fight back against Nazis. And they're being encouraged to be activists on the assumption that we're surrounded by evil Nazis in every corner that are doing terrible things to us. Did you know these people killed 1 million babies just in the last 1 second? And so young children are subject to this insane propaganda and believing it. Why don't you have an equal outcome with the reason is because of those Nazis, and we have to fight back. So you go to that climate change protest. So very much an ideological education which is changing the nature. Now, going back to my days at high school, which isn't that long ago, for fuck's sake. I was sort of, I went to a teacher, I suppose this would have been 3rd or 4th year or something, maybe even 2nd year. And I wanted to do better in this particular subject. So I went to teacher and, what have I got to do? I want to come in, the top students, and I'm coming somewhere, like I don't know, a class of 35 kids. I was coming like 12th or something in this particular subject. And it wasn't, and I thought, I should be doing better than that. And so I went to teacher. Teacher said, you know what you have to do, Billy Bob? You have to just work harder. You have to work harder at it. And he very kindly sort of gave me like a suggested reading list and those sort of things. And he said, you just have to study how you revise before the exams, start revising your work. You have to make the effort. You have to put that time in and concentrate and dedicate yourself to getting it. But, if you don't do that, then it's unlikely that you're going to get a better result. So you just have to put the time and the work into it. And, for example, have you read chapter 3 of your textbook, and so on. So going through like that, but really is saying you want to do better, you got to work harder. And so I look back now, or even at the time, I think I look back now though and say, well, it's pretty basic 101 stuff, but that is how you do better. You work harder, you read more, you put more time into it, and serious time, not just sort of frivolous time, but that's how you do better. And so now the quality of teaching can help. Do you have a home situation where you've got 50 brothers and sisters who are all screaming and carrying on and breaking and concentrating? There can be other factors, and I appreciate that. But that's really the bottom line is you put in more work. Now that's something that seems to be a bit of a rarity today. So let's have a look. The claim that there's never been, teachers have got bigger classrooms than ever and have more responsibility. That's bullshit. So we can take that out of that. That's just lies, just plain lies. Now, in terms of the amount of money being spent on schools, the amount of money, adjusting for inflation, is well above what it was. This is per student and the total budget, well above what it was in again using 1970 as the sort of the benchmark here. And so that's a lie. There's a lot more money being spent. Now, where it's being spent, if it's being spent on the student, like at the school level, or if it's being spent on, lesbian dance classes or lesbian painting classes or trans propaganda that could be debated, and I think a lot of the resources are going for that sort of nonsense and employing various activist hack goons, stooges, and on decent money, as and spending money on external consultants that are producing gay lesbian propaganda. I think there's a lot of money being spent there. So it doesn't mean because a lot more money is being spent on average per student across the total budget, doesn't necessarily mean it's being spent directly on the student in terms of better better frontline facilities and that sort of thing. So I do concede there's a possibility of misspending money on simply ideological insanity rather than on education. So, but going through the rest of it, I picked it apart within minutes that the whole thing was lies. The student classes are smaller. There are more teachers than ever. The amount of money being spent in total is more than it ever was, and so on and so on. So by any measure, the supposed conditions for a higher quality education, the conditions are better than they've ever been, not worse. And yet standards continue to decline. Now, I mean, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that once you give participation trophies to everybody, no matter how hopeless their work is, and students, and you give affirmative action passes and diplomas and that sort of thing, that standards will decline. And if your emphasis is on equal outcomes rather than rigorous, high quality, merit-based education, then sure, that the outcome. But also they're looking at, say, the mass immigration thing, where there's mass arrival of students who don't speak a word of English. Now, the sort of migrant that you might get, say, in the previous migrant intakes into Australia in, say, the 1960s, 1970s, where you would get the people who came from non-English speaking countries, they tended to have young children, 2 years old, 3 years old, that sort of thing. So they would go to, technically at least go to kindergarten or somewhere, and they would learn English there. So by the time they got to school, they could speak passable English. But now there's a lot of people, particularly amongst the refugee intake or supposed refugees, people who are, they're already at high school age and don't speak a word of English. There's no requirement for them to learn it. There's no emphasis, hey, you've got to learn English. Instead, they're just sort of let loose. And these people that tend to be very disruptive. Also, we say Pacific Islands, people like that, they've never actually had to sit in a classroom. Or it's an hour a day or something like that. So they're already teenagers and they're illiterate, and they've never had the discipline of sitting in a classroom to learn. So, and they have a view that only the tribal elders can tell them what to do. This stupid teacher here, why should we take any notice of them? And so a very different view on how authority is administered and responsibility is taken and so on. So in these schools where there's a high refugee intake, there are people that don't speak a lick of English. They're claiming that, well, these students aren't paying attention in class. Well, what do you expect? They should be moved into a separate school where they're given intensive English language lessons before they're put into the general school population. There's no effort made to integrate these people. And on the basis of supposed racial equality, we're supposed to look the other way on this. But they have the effect of disrupting the other students that do speak English, and no one who's speaking up for them. Nobody. So anyway, that's it. And I've noticed this propaganda doing the rounds, but I picked it apart in 5 minutes. Nothing but lies upon lies upon lies, and yet this passes for debate in terms of particularly high school education here in Australia. You're being a Tacitus today. You're a pushback channel. Thank you for listening.